Okay, so in my experience of fire, I guess there are kind of three main types of fire. One is what for me has become almost a mundane type of fire in my life, I guess, which is cooking fire or fire in a hearth place. So I've spent many nights sitting next to a fire, and I've cooked on fires at campsites, and I've spent time living with people who cook every meal on a fire. And so those fires have become almost kind of background fires that don't necessarily feel like they are a specific event for me. But there are two other types of fire that I've experienced on a much bigger scale. And those were like a few select experiences. So for me, they are kind of like, they stick in my head as like these special experiences. So one of those was a couple of times that I've taken part in what's called prescribed burning, which is where people write a pretty clear plan for a fire, and it has particular management objectives for a landscape. So in the case of the fires that I took part in, they were for forestry and nature conservation objectives, I guess. And they took place on a big scale with a big team of people, and there was like a clear plan ahead of time that was written down for the fire. And the other type of fire was an agricultural, or like I went to several different agricultural burns in Belize, which were like one farmer's family basically. I think all the ones I went to, it was just one or two people lighting the fire, and they were burning a plot of land that they had cleared to plant in. And in both of those cases, it was the experience of being there in the fire was very different to what I had read about in advance of being there. So I'd read about agricultural fires, and I had read, plans for prescribed fires, but those experiences of being there in the middle of the fire were very different from the kind of neat, you could draw a diagram for the prescribed fire of this box that we were going to burn, and it's like you're going to start from this side and the wind's coming from here, and it all seems very scientific and kind of planned, but actually in reality, when you're in the middle of it, you don't have that kind of oversight that you have on the diagram of the fire, and it's quite overwhelming. The smoke is so strong that it becomes dark, the sun is blocked out, and and there's like almost a kind of change in the winds that's created by that smoke and all the heat going up, and all of that kind of stuff I wasn't really prepared for. I didn't really kind of realize that would be a part of it. And I guess I was, particularly in the prescribed fires, which were very big, I was in my small part of protecting the boundary of the fire, and so I had no idea what was going on at the other side of the fire once the fire line passed where I was. That I kind of, it was out of my sight and my vision. And I guess it's funny kind of thinking back, because this was a couple of years ago now that I was part of these fires. And so in funny ways, my like trying to remember them and bring back those experiences, it was very much linked to the photos that I took at those events, and kind of like for me, they really brought back some of the experience. But I guess for people that participate in these kinds of fires on a regular basis, they become the kind of more mundane fires, the everyday fires. And I would be really interested to know how your experience of that would change if you were taking part in fires like this, on a monthly basis or whatever throughout a dry season every year. So yeah, I think it would become less of a fixed event in your brain. Yeah, so I'll leave it there. Some thoughts from me. I don't know who I'm passing on to.
Shall I go next? And maybe that can, I'm going to make some links to what Cathy says, but maybe I can just start with saying, I was kind of thinking about this, what are my experiences of fire? And And a bit like what Cathy said with cooking, I think it's been something that's been there my whole life, really, in, I would say, two ways. First of all, I come from the caste of potters. That's my Indian tradition, and I'm a potter myself, and so I like to think both clay and fire, which are two very important elements of my process, are in my blood. So I feel that is an element of fire that's always been there and kind of like permeates through my life. But at the same time, I suppose I was brought up in a Hindu tradition. So my parents, my grandparents, every day they light a fire in the house as part of a ritual, in terms of, the gods, and everybody, like my mum has a little kind of temple, like a mini temple in her house, and she would every day light a fire. So we have the god of fire, which is Agni. And so, fire is a very important part in the Hindu tradition, not just in terms of everyday prayer, but also in very important events such as weddings and funerals. And, fire is always a part. Obviously, that, in the Hindu tradition, people are cremated on a fire, normally a big bonfire. So I think that's another element of fire that's always kind of been there. And then, my husband is also a bit of a fire starter. He tended to light fires for no particular reason, but is also very good at actually setting a fire. He can even do one in the rain. It can be pouring with rain and he can get a fire started. He's so good at it. So I suppose fire's always been there kind of in my life in different kinds of ways. And then in terms of kind of more landscape fires, I suppose it's kind of when I went to do my PhD research and kind of different experiences. Firstly, a bit like Cathy in terms of prescribed fires, because I was working in experimental plots where they were setting fires at certain times. And they were they seemed to be what they were very controlled, or what I felt was there was a lot of control around those fires. People were kind of looking out for them. They were all surrounded. They were done in certain ways to ensure that the fire didn't go from one plot to the other. But then after that, kind of experience working with indigenous groups in different parts of Brazil, Guyana, but also in Venezuela, how people are much more freer. And there isn't that necessarily, there is control, but there isn't control. It's kind of like a strange kind of thing there, where you don't see that kind of control that you see in the prescribed fires, or and so in that case, seeing much larger fires compared to the small ones in the prescribed fires was quite, and I think in terms, for me, I still have these memories of things like embers, after the fire has passed and there's things still glowing everywhere. So even though the fire's gone, the landscape seems still to be glowing. You see all these embers everywhere. You see like trunks or things, fallen branches on the floor that are still glowing or still burning. So it kind of makes you realize that fire isn't just the flame, because you always associate, like we see our friend here, the flame, but fire is also the embers, and it's also the other, there's a lot of aspects of the fire, the smoke, as Cathy was talking about. So I'm going to stop there. That's my experience of fire. I pass to Christina.
Yes, I don't have an experience of such fire in the wilderness. I grew up in Switzerland as an Italian child, and in Switzerland it is very fashionable, but really also a custom to make fire, like Boy Scouts, or to be outside and to roast sausages in the forest. And being an Italian child, where there is this culture is not there. This is almost a little pagan for the Italian person who comes from the city. So my parents would be very cautious about this. But that It felt like a very archaic element still lives in Switzerland with this making fire. And it is simply something I absolutely adore and love to do. I don't know if it has to do with my childhood and of moments of childhood and looking into the flame and as if the time stands still while watching the flames, or this dance of the flame, the energy, how the wood is absorbed by the fire. Anyway, what I wanted to tell in this context, when I was thinking about my experience, a deep experience of fire is a very strange one. And it is actually an imagination I had. So I don't know, it is fed by biography, by memories of fire. It must be. But what I want to tell is not a real fire, but an imagined fire. And it's a bit special, this story, but anyhow, it came in my mind when we spoke, and it comes in my mind in our conversation. And this is that I got pregnant, I got a child when I was 47 years old. And this was the first time in my life that I was pregnant. And that was quite miraculous and a big surprise. I was a woman who was called, I was supposed not being able to have children. But anyway, with 47, I got pregnant and I had to decide, can I keep this child? Will it be healthy? Will it be able to live? And it was dangerous because I'm old, my body is older, gynecologically, biologically. And so I was thinking, and it was the most difficult decision in my whole life, what to do now. Do I say yes or do I say no about this life? So I was walking in the park for 2 months, but at one point you have to decide. This is timely, really. And I went to an expert also who can help me, maybe in understanding what do I really feel? So many fears through me. What is really the right decision here? And the expert made a game with me. It was a small game. It was very easy. There are 3 chairs. The first chair, you sit and you got the child. How do you feel? The second chair, you sit. You didn't take the child. How do you feel? The third chair, listen to the 2 chairs. So there are 3 Christinas here. One sits on the first, one sits on the second, and the third one decides because she listens to the 2 other ones. And we did it. I first sit on the first chair, and what I saw, I closed my eyes, I concentrated, and what I saw was a fire. A small fire burning. It was very small, and there was only me. It was only me and that fire. And it gave me incredible concentration, most of all, and a sense of being here. A sense of being here and taking place. A sense of being or becoming, something like this. But just me and that fire. And I felt very strong, just completely centered, as if that fire was in my belly. And then that was it. I told it out loud. And the second chair, I didn't want to sit anymore. But anyway, I did. For the sake of this experiment, I was sitting on the second chair. I closed my eyes. And I was somewhere in the suburbs, in the complete industrial place, in a very anonymous place. I was totally lost there. There was no sign, no indication, like you are on a train station, but the train never comes or something, like a complete desolate place, without coordination, without mark, nothing. Almost as if the world had forgotten me, that I'm there on this stage. For the third woman who was listening to these two stories, it was easy to decide. I decided to have the child, and it's the one who makes the fire here for you. But that this image is connected to that fire that I kind of imagined at that moment in time. This is something I had to think a lot when we were talking. Just my way of trying to understand my connection to it, and it's a totally different one, but it's the way I understand a sense of place and a sense of taking place and a sense of limiting something. So to mark something also as to being here and not being everywhere and nowhere, really. So the picture, this imagination that came up in this moment on this chair, me and that little fire, is the way how I, in my deepest, can enter our conversation. In a way, this is my entrance as to what I can understand of, because we are speaking of, when we speak about these fires in Brazil, in the Amazon, it's a very different context than all the three of us. And I don't think experience, what we spoke now about, is without context. It's always a context. We can't take it out of the context. So this is my context, how I come in.